She sat in the wrong seat on the plane. The stranger beside her turned out to be a CEO looking for something real. "Ma'am, you're holding up the line." The sharp voice behind her snapped Ava out of her fog. She adjusted the baby bag digging into her shoulder and offered a weak smile. Mary, her 9-month-old daughter, whimpered softly in her arms, cheeks flushed and fists clenched. She was seconds from a meltdown. "Sorry," Ava mumbled, dragging her scuffed suitcase through the cramped aisle. It caught on an armrest, jerking her sideways. She caught herself, clutching Mary tighter as she navigated the crowded economy cabin. Her eyes scanned the numbers. Row 19, 20, 21. Almost there. Mary let out a sharp wail. Ava fumbled through her bag for a bottle, her pulse racing. She felt the weight of eyes on her back. Then, relief. An empty window seat, no one seated next to it. She did not check her ticket, she just needed to sit. Sliding in, she quickly settled Mary in her lap, shushing her with soft words and gentle pats. The baby's cries faded to hiccups. Ava reached for the formula and bottle, her hands trembling. The world shrank to noise and motion and pressure. A shadow fell across her lap. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy slacks. He looked out of place in economy. His cool gray eyes flicked from the ticket in his hand to Ava and her baby. Ava's stomach twisted. "Oh," she said, panicked. "I'm so sorry. I thought this seat was open. I can move, really?" She started to rise, juggling her bag and child. Mary began to cry again. Ava's chest tightened. The man raised a calm hand. "It's okay. Keep the seat. I'll sit here." Without waiting, he slid into the middle seat beside her. Ava blinked. "Are you sure?" He glanced at her, then at Mary. "I'm sure." Something about his calm steadiness grounded her. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and exhaled, settling in. What Ava didn't know, what no one around them knew, was that the man beside her was Brian Hale, a tech CEO worth nearly $500 million. His face had graced business magazines, and his name was synonymous with innovation. But today, business class was sold out. He had taken the last economy seat to make an urgent meeting in Chicago. He had boarded, expecting discomfort, maybe a loud child nearby. But not this. Not a woman sitting in his seat. Not a baby who looked eerily like his niece. Not the jolt in his chest when her eyes met his. Tired, apologetic, full of weight, he had opened his mouth to speak, to ask her to move. And then he noticed the bruise, faint, fading, hidden under too light foundation. The way she held her baby protectively, like a barrier, the slight tremble in her hands, the fear behind her apology. And just like that, he remembered. His sister, Chloe, eyes haunted, holding her child, running from pain. Brian hadn't reached her in time. He looked again at Ava and sat down without another word. Ava slowly let her breath go. Mary, now suckling quietly, settled deeper into her arms. Ava adjusted the blanket over her, then risked a glance at the man beside her. Most would have made a scene, complained, demanded their seat back. Not him. "I really appreciate it," she said, her voice soft. It's been a long day." He turned to her, face unreadable. "I can imagine." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, just present. Mary drifted off to sleep, one tiny fist curled in Ava's shirt. Ava finally leaned back, a moment of peace washing over her. The plane began to taxi. Brian leaned back too, closing his eyes briefly. Two strangers, two stories, bound by a seat assignment and something unspoken. Neither of them knew it yet. But this flight would change everything. The contrast between them was almost cinematic. Ava, with her faded jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt stained faintly with milk and dark circles under her eyes, looked like she had not had a full night's sleep in months. She shifted constantly, adjusting her grip on Mary, who squirmed restlessly in her lap. Every small sound the baby made sent a flicker of panic through Ava's eyes, as if she expected the entire plane to turn against her with the first whimper. Next to her sat Brian, cool and composed in his tailored clothes. His wristwatch alone cost more than Ava's entire month's rent, yet he seemed distant, distracted. He stared straight ahead, jaw tense, mind clearly elsewhere. A major contract negotiation awaited him in Chicago, billions of dollars on the line, but for some reason he found it harder to focus on that than on the woman beside him. Beside him, Brian stole a glance at her from the corner of his eye. She was doing her best to keep quiet, to take up as little space as possible, to be invisible. He recognized that kind of fear, the kind that taught people how to vanish in plain sight. Then Mary started crying. A sudden sharp wail filled the cabin. Several passengers groaned. A man across the aisle rolled his eyes and muttered, "Here we go." Ava's cheeks flamed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, fumbling in the baby bag. She pulled out the bottle, but her hands were trembling. The cap slipped through her fingers and rolled under the seat. She bent down, trying to reach it while still holding Mary, but the baby's cries only got louder. Brian moved. Without a word, he leaned down, retrieved the cap, and handed it to her. "Do you need hot water?" he asked, his voice calm. Ava looked at him, surprised. I usually ask the flight attendant, but she's at the front. I can wait." Brian was already pressing the call button. When the attendant arrived, he spoke before Ava could. "Could we get some hot water for her baby's bottle, please?" The attendant nodded, glancing kindly at Ava, and returned a minute later with a small cup of steaming water. Brian carefully poured it into the bottle, testing the temperature on the back of his hand, then tightened the cap and gave it a gentle shake. When he handed it to Ava, Mary was crying so hard her face had turned red. "Here," he said, passing her the bottle. Ava took it with both hands, almost reverently. She offered the bottle to Mary, who latched on instantly. Within seconds, the baby quieted, her tiny body relaxing against her mother's chest. Ava looked at Brian, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, really." He offered a small smile, but said nothing. From a few rows back, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Not many guys would do that." Mary let out a soft sigh as she sucked on the bottle, then reached out one tiny hand, grabbing Brian's index finger. He stared at the small fist wrapped around his finger, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. Something about the gesture, completely innocent, completely trusting, disarmed him. Ava watched the moment in quiet awe. She had not expected help. She had not expected kindness. She certainly had not expected this stranger, who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine, to stoop down and care about her baby like she mattered. Like Mary mattered. She cleared her throat. "Most people get annoyed." Brian finally turned to look at her fully. "She's a baby," he said simply. "She has a right to exist, too." Ava stared at him for a long moment, and in that time something shifted. A wall, a thick, invisible one, between their worlds, cracked. In this cramped, recycled air cabin, full of strangers and expectations and noise, Brian Hale had made a choice. A small one, maybe, but to Ava it felt monumental. Because someone had chosen to be kind. Not out of obligation, not for show, but because they saw her, and chose not to turn away. And as Mary fell into a peaceful sleep, her fingers still curled around his, Ava found herself breathing easier. Maybe, just maybe, not all strangers were dangerous. And maybe, kindness could come from the most unexpected places. Mary was finally asleep. Her tiny head rested against Ava's chest, her little lips parted slightly, the bottle slipping from her relaxed fingers. The rhythm of the airplane's hum and the fullness in her belly had done the trick. Ava exhaled slowly and leaned back, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness. Beside her, Brian sat with his hands folded in his lap, eyes focused on the clouds beyond the window. The storm inside him had calmed, though he did not fully understand why. "Thank you again," Ava said softly, careful not to wake Mary. "Most people just roll their eyes or groan. You didn't." Brian turned to her. "I did inside," he said dryly. Then he smirked, but only for half a second. Ava chuckled, the sound surprising even herself. Half a second still a record. A pause passed before Brian asked, "Where are you headed?" "Chicago," she replied. "Staying with my cousin while I figure things out." "Fresh start?" She nodded, brushing her fingers through Mary's hair. "Hopefully." Brian gave her space, sensing she had more to say. "I used to teach preschool," she said after a moment. "I loved it. The chaos, the laughter, all of it. Then I got married. Too young. Thought I knew what love looked like." She looked away. "It wasn't love. It was control. He watched everything. My calls, my texts, what I wore, who I spoke to. I stopped recognizing myself." Brian didn't interrupt. "I stayed, even when it hurt. I thought I had to. But then Mary came." She looked down at her daughter. "I couldn't let her grow up thinking that kind of love was normal. One night, I packed a bag and left. No plan, just the two of us." Brian's voice was low. "That's brave." "It doesn't feel brave," Ava admitted. "I'm still scared. Every time someone looks at me too long, I wonder if they're judging me, or worse, if he's coming." "I get that," Brian said quietly. Ava turned to him. "Do you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "My fiancée died in a car crash. She was on her way to meet me to celebrate a promotion. After that, I stopped trying to feel much of anything. Business made sense. Emotions didn't." "Excellent." Ava's gaze softened. She saw the pain beneath his calm. Brian reached into the seat pocket and pulled out a small notepad and pen. With practiced hands, he began folding the paper. "What are you doing?" Ava asked. "Something my sister used to do. It helped her with anxiety. She taught me." A few minutes later, he handed her a small paper star and gently placed it next to Mary's hand. "For her," he said. "To wish for better days." Ava stared at it. A lump rose in her throat. "No one's ever made anything for her before." "There's a first for everything," he said. She smiled, genuinely. The cabin lights dimmed. Somewhere ahead, someone was snoring. Ava's body began to give in to exhaustion. She felt as if everything... Brian noticed. "You can sleep. I'll watch her." Ava hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Promise." Within minutes, she drifted off, her head tilted toward him, Mary still curled in her arms. Brian looked at them for a long moment, two strangers, one fragile bond. Then he reached for the airline blanket and draped it carefully over them, tucking the edges around Mary. He leaned back, eyes on the little paper star. Maybe, just maybe, something inside him was changing too. Hours passed. When Ava stirred, blinking against the dim cabin lights, the first thing she noticed was the blanket, then the star, and finally, Brian, still seated beside her, awake, calm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not judging me." Brian looked at her, eyes steady. "Never." It was somewhere over Nebraska when Ava stirred violently in her seat, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she gasped, eyes still shut. "Please, don't take her. Don't." Her hand shot out, clutching at the blanket, at the empty air in front of her. Brian jolted awake beside her. The overhead lights had dimmed to a soft glow, and most passengers were asleep or lost in their screens. But Ava was trembling, clutching Mary tightly to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. "Hey," Brian said softly, reaching into his seat pocket. He pulled out a tissue and gently offered it to her. "It's okay. You're safe here." Ava opened her eyes slowly. The fear lingered in her expression. She took the tissue with shaking fingers, then turned away slightly, dabbing her eyes. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." She stopped herself and exhaled a long, trembling breath. "I had a dream about him." Brian stayed quiet, allowing the silence to give her space. She looked down at Mary, who was still fast asleep, one fist curled under her chin. Ava's voice lowered. "In the dream, he found us. He tried to take her away from me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream." "You're safe now," Brian said again, gently. "He's not here. And you're not alone." Ava looked at him. Her eyes, though red and tired, were clear now, raw, real. "I left with nothing," she said. "No plan. No money, really. Just a diaper bag, a suitcase, and Mary. I thought if I stayed any longer, I wouldn't survive. And if I didn't survive, she'd never have a chance at something better." Brian listened, not just with his ears, but with every part of him. "I slept in a shelter for 3 nights. Then a friend of my cousin's let us crash on their couch. Now we're going to stay with Laura, my cousin. She says we can stay as long as we need, but—" Ava hesitated. "I don't want to be someone's burden forever. I want to work again, maybe teach again, but mostly I just want Mary to grow up laughing, not flinching." She looked at Brian, her voice steady now. "I don't need saving. I just need a place where she can grow up happy." Brian felt his throat tighten. He had met plenty of women, business partners, charity board members, socialites at galas. But no one had ever looked at him like this. No filters, no agendas. Just brutal, honest courage. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "Chloe. She was like you. Kind, tough, too proud to ask for help. Her boyfriend hit her too. She never told anyone until it was too late." Ava's breath caught. Brian continued, his voice more measured now, distant but deep. "She tried to leave once. I offered her money, a place to stay, security. She refused, said she needed to do it her way, that she didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her, and then one night, he came home drunk. She never made it out again." Ava put a hand over her mouth. "I'm so sorry." He nodded once, eyes fixed on the seatback in front of him. "I couldn't save her, and I couldn't save the woman I loved either. She died in a car accident before I could ask her to marry me. Since then, it's just been surviving." They sat in the heavy quiet that followed. Nothing else was needed. Pain recognizes pain. Ava reached for her diaper bag and pulled out the same notepad Brian had used earlier. She tore off a sheet and began folding, her movements careful, deliberate. A few moments later, she held out a tiny paper star, just like the one he had made for Mary. "For you," she said, "to remember that you did help someone. Today." Brian looked at the star in his hand. It was smaller than his, a little lopsided, but made with care. He ran a thumb over one of the folds, as if afraid it would vanish. "No one's given me anything like this in years," he whispered. Ava leaned back again, exhausted but oddly lighter. Mary shifted in her sleep, making a small sighing noise that made both adults smile faintly. Brian tucked the origami star into the pocket of his shirt, close to his chest. For a brief moment, time seemed to still. The cabin noise faded, and the past, the grief, the fear, the weight, lifted just enough for something else to rise in its place. Trust, and maybe, in time, something more. The announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Chicago. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Ava gently adjusted Mary in her lap, who was still asleep, curled against her chest with her tiny fingers clutching the edge of Ava's sweater. She smoothed the baby's soft hair and stared out the window, watching the clouds thin as the city lights twinkled beneath them. Beside her, Brian said nothing. He was watching her, or perhaps the quiet way she protected Mary, like the whole world still posed a threat. He had so many things he wanted to say, but none of them seemed right. The cabin filled with subtle movement, bags shuffled, seat backs raised, flight attendants checking rows. But in row 21B and 21C, there was only silence. It was not the absence of words. It was the heaviness of emotion unspoken. Finally, Ava reached into the seat pocket in front of her and pulled out another notepad. She tore a sheet and began folding with steady fingers. When she finished, she placed the small paper star on Brian's tray table and looked him in the eye. "For your sister," she said softly. Brian stared at it for a moment, then lifted it gently. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. As the plane touched down, with a gentle jolt, the two of them remained quiet, both holding on to something intangible, something neither was ready to name. The seatbelt sign turned off with a ding. People stood, stretched, reached for overhead bags. Ava remained seated, adjusting Mary into the baby carrier. Brian stood and waited, offering a hand to help with her diaper bag. She accepted it. Their fingers brushed. A tiny, electric pause. Outside the jet bridge, the crowd dispersed into the bustling terminal. Ava turned to Brian one last time. "Thank you," she said, "for being kind when you didn't have to be." Brian took a step closer. "Can I give you my number? Or would you give me yours?" Ava hesitated. For a split second, she wanted to say yes, to hand him her phone, to hold on to something good. But then, fear curled up again at the back of her mind. The fear of being known, being vulnerable, being found. "I can't," she whispered. "You're kind, but we're from different worlds." Brian's brows drew together. "That doesn't matter." "It does," she replied. "You live in boardrooms and jet-set meetings. I live in shelters and borrowed rooms. I can't risk needing someone, not again." He looked as if he might argue, but instead he stepped back, gave her space. Ava turned, walking away with Mary strapped to her chest, her shoulders pulled tight, head held high. Brian remained standing in the middle of the terminal, passengers weaving around him like waves around a rock. In his hand he held the paper star, crushed slightly from how tightly he was gripping it. He watched until she was out of sight. And then something clicked. A flash of memory. Months ago, a charity event his company had sponsored. He had visited a women's shelter they funded, mostly for PR. He remembered walking through the common room, shaking hands, making small talk. And then he saw it. Her. Ava, sitting with a counselor, baby in lap, looking lost, looking just like she had today. His chest tightened. "I've seen her before," he whispered to himself. "And I won't lose her again." He slipped the origami star into his coat pocket and walked with purpose toward the exit. He did not know how yet, but he was going to find her. Not because she needed him, but because for the first time in years, he needed someone too. Back in his office, Brian sat behind his polished glass desk, the city skyline stretching behind him like a framed painting. His assistant slid the final contract across the table. "All it needs is your signature," she said. He picked up the pen and signed. The ink dried, the deal was done. Billions locked in, shareholders thrilled. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. Later that evening, as the office lights dimmed and most employees had gone home, Brian pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Tom?" he said as soon as the line picked up. "Brian?" came the reply, surprised. "What's going on?" "I need your help. You still at O'Hare?" "Yeah. I'm on night rotation this week. What do you need?" "There was a woman, blonde, mid-20s. She had a baby, maybe 9 months old. She was on flight 382 to Chicago with me 2 nights ago. Can you check the manifest? Tom whistled softly. That's not exactly something I should be doing. I know, Brian said, but please, it's important. A pause. Then, give me a few minutes. Brian waited, pacing his office, one hand in his pocket, fingering the folded star Ava had made. 20 minutes later, Tom called back. Name's Ava Kelly, traveling with infant Mary Kelly, ticket purchased through a women's outreach group. Destination listed as Chestnut Hill, Illinois. That's all I've got. Brian closed his eyes. That's enough, thank you. He did not tell anyone he was leaving the city the next day. He took no driver, no bodyguard, no luxury SUV. He rented a simple sedan, dressed down in jeans and a hoodie, and drove 3 hours west through stretches of empty highway and autumn-tinted trees. In the passenger seat, on top of his duffel bag, sat a single item. An origami star, slightly larger than the others, folded carefully from cardstock and inscribed with delicate handwriting. For Mary. Chestnut Hill was a small, quiet town nestled between wooded hills. Brian found the park easily. A modest space with a few benches, an old swing set, and a shaded area where children played on a colorful jungle gym. And there she was, Eva. She was sitting cross-legged on the grass, Mary in front of her, laughing as she tried to chase falling leaves. The sight of them stopped Brian cold. Ava's face was softer, freer than he had ever seen it. Her laugh, though distant, carried. He stayed near the edge of the park, behind a tree, heart pounding, not from fear but uncertainty. What if she thought he was tracking her? What if she felt cornered, judged, pitied? He did not want to be another man who made her feel small. He almost turned around. But before he could take a step, someone approached from the side. A red-haired woman in her early 30s, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She looked him up and down and said bluntly, "You're not from around here." Brian gave a small nod. "I'm looking for someone. Ava." Her brows lifted slightly. "You Brian?" "Yes." She looked him over again, her gaze more curious than suspicious now. "I'm Laura, her cousin." Brian swallowed. "Is she okay?" "He's getting there," Laura replied. "You're the guy from the plane?" "I am." Laura tilted her head. "You drove all the way out here to see her?" Brian nodded and held out the star. "For Mary." Laura took the star, reading the neat letters. She looked back toward the park. "That man drove hours to find you," she murmured to herself, then glanced at Brian. "Maybe you're different." She walked away, crossing the field toward Ava, who had just picked up Mary in her arms. As they spoke quietly, Ava turned her head. She saw him. Their eyes met across the distance. She did not move. Not yet. But she did not look away. The bell above the door jingled as Ava stepped into the corner grocery store, clutching a shopping list in one hand and balancing Mary on her hip with the other. She barely noticed the man standing in the produce aisle until she reached for a carton of strawberries, and their eyes locked. "Ryan." He looked just as surprised as she felt, but not startled, more like hopeful. "Ava," he said softly, straightening. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "What are you doing here?" "I was driving through," he said, not even attempting to make the lie convincing. Her eyes narrowed. "You followed me." "I found you," he corrected gently, "because I couldn't stop thinking about you. And I didn't come to save you, Ava. I came because I miss you." Her grip tightened around Mary, who babbled softly and reached out toward Brian. Ava hesitated. Part of her wanted to walk away, to shut down the conversation before it could turn into something messy. But another part, deeper, quieter, was tired of shutting doors. Why would someone like you miss someone like me? Brian's eyes didn't waver. "Because you made me feel something I thought I had lost. Because you're strong and real, and because your little girl smiled at me like she trusted me, before I even knew how to trust myself again." Ava's face softened. They stood there for just a beat longer than casual. Then she nodded once. Okay. Walk me home? From that day on, they started to meet, quietly, naturally. Walks through the neighborhood, coffee on a park bench while Mary played, folding tiny origami stars together, Brian showing Ava new designs from memory, Ava laughing when her folds went crooked. For once, time did not feel like a countdown. It felt like possibility. But the quiet didn't last long. One evening, Ava received a text from an unknown number. Just a photo of Mary, taken months ago in a stroller. Then another message. You can't keep her from me forever. I'm coming. James. Her hands shook as she showed it to Brian. His jaw clenched. Do you want to call the police? Hasn't technically done anything yet, she said bitterly. Just a threat. But I know him. If he says he's coming, he will. Brian reached for his phone. I know a good lawyer, one of the best in the state. We'll make sure he never gets close to her. Ava hesitated. I don't want to owe you. You won't, he said simply. This isn't a favor. It's what you and Mary deserve. That night, she sat on the porch with Laura, watching Mary sleep inside through the window. Ava wants to help, Ava whispered. But what if I start needing him too much? What if he leaves? What if he's just another version of James, in a nicer suit? Laura sipped her tea, thoughtful. He's not like James. You know it. Deep down, you do. Let him in. Trust yourself first. The next day, they met at the park again. Mary toddled ahead, chasing butterflies and waving her arms. Brian stood beside Ava, quiet but steady. Then Mary turned, stumbled into Brian's legs, and held up her arms. He bent and scooped her up instinctively, making a silly face that made her giggle. Ava watched them for a moment. The ease, the joy. She reached out and took Brian's hand. I thought I'd never feel safe again, she said quietly. Brian looked down at her, his expression soft. Neither did I. Ava now worked part-time at a local community center thanks to Laura's introduction. The job didn't pay much, but it gave her purpose and peace. The center was a haven for women like her, and she'd found comfort in helping others rebuild what she had once lost. Unbeknownst to most, the center had recently received a quiet but generous donation, enough to expand their services. The donor? Brian. He had insisted his name not be attached and never mentioned it to Ava. He believed she deserved space to grow on her own, not because of his wealth, but because of her strength. One sunny afternoon, the center hosted a small picnic to celebrate Freedom Day, a day dedicated to new beginnings. Ava, Laura, Tom, and a handful of local families gathered in the backyard garden. Children ran between tables, and paper stars fluttered from tree branches. Ava was helping Mary fold a bright blue origami star when the little girl suddenly toddled away, star in hand. Mary ran straight to Brian, who knelt just in time to catch her in his arms. Her little hands wrapped around his neck, and she pressed the paper star against his chest. "Papa?" she said softly. Ava stood frozen just a few feet away, her heart clenching. Brian looked up at her, his eyes gentle but serious. "I don't want to replace her dad," he said slowly, "but I would like to—" Ava's eyes filled with tears. She swallowed, then whispered, "I know." It was a quiet moment, but it changed everything. But peace never came without tests. James, Ava's ex-husband, had begun texting again. This time, the messages weren't just cruel, they were legal threats. He had filed paperwork, attempting to gain custody of Mary. He sent pictures of court documents, demanding Ava surrender their daughter or face a judge. This time, Ava didn't shake. She didn't hide. Instead, she brought the papers to Brian. "He's serious," she said. "So are we," Brian replied. "Let's fight this." He took her to a family law office, one he had personally funded as part of a legal aid initiative. But he sat in the waiting room while Ava spoke to the lawyers. This had to be her decision, her voice. With the center's help, Ava and her attorney gathered a mountain of evidence. Medical reports, testimonies from neighbors, voice messages, and statements from the women's shelter where Ava had once found refuge. The team built a case grounded in truth and undeniable harm. The courtroom was tense, sterile, cold. James wore a suit too big for his ego. His arguments were weak, bitter, desperate. He tried to twist the narrative, calling Ava unstable, reckless. Then, Ava took the stand. She stood not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived and grown. "I was trapped because I was afraid," she said, her voice unwavering. "But now I stand here, not just as a mother, but as a human being fighting for my child's right to safety." From the back of the courtroom, Brian watched. He didn't interrupt. He didn't step forward. He just sat quietly, his eyes locked on her, silently beaming with pride. When Ava stepped down from the stand, she passed him. "You were brave," he said softly. The ruling came swiftly. James was stripped of all parental rights. The judge issued a permanent restraining order. As security escorted James from the courtroom, he cast one last look at Ava, but saw only strength in her eyes. And he knew he had lost more than a case. He had lost control. Forever. Weeks later, the community center's Freedom Day celebration came to life. Under strings of fairy lights and paper stars, Ava stood at the front of the gathering. She held Mary in one arm and a microphone in the other. "For a long time," she began, her voice warm, "I believed love was dangerous. But today, I know. True love doesn't cage you. It sets you free." The crowd applauded softly. Brian stepped forward holding a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of origami stars, some creased and worn, others fresh and crisp. He lifted the largest one, golden and folded with care. Written across it were 3 words: "For our future." He didn't kneel. He didn't make a spectacle. He just looked at her. "I love you, Ava," he said. "Not because you're perfect, but because you fight every day and still smile. I don't want to save Mary. I just want to be there for her. For both of you." Ava's hand covered her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Then she nodded. "Then we stay," she whispered, "together." 1 year later, a golden sunset bathed the lake in light. Ava and Brian walked hand in hand along the shore, now husband and wife after a quiet ceremony, with Laura, Tom, and the children from the center. Mary skipped ahead, her tiny fingers holding a ribbon tied to a paper star. The breeze caught it, lifting it gently into the air. A narrator's voice rose softly. Holmes' seat was wrong, but the heart was right. A story of courage, healing, and a love that lasted. As the camera pulled away, the family stood framed against the fading sun. A new family, not perfect, but whole and real. Thank you for joining us on this soul-stirring journey of hope, healing, and unexpected love. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, or made you believe in second chances, you're exactly where you belong. At Soul Stirring Stories, we bring you real, emotional, and heartwarming tales that speak to the human spirit. Stories that heal. Stories that stay with you. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of hope, resilience, and connection. Because sometimes, all it takes is the wrong seat to find the right heart. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep your heart open.